Hi everybody, it's 9 o'clock and 9 o'clock is with me, Father Warner. It's Monday in the 19th week of Ordinary Time and we are in the beginning of a new week. Our text today is taken from Ezekiel. We will be studying the prophet Ezekiel, I think over a week or 2 weeks, and then we move to the St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Today we're going to look at Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 2 to 5 and verse 24 to 28c. I'm not going to read the text because it's a very heavy text, but I recommend that you read the entire text of Ezekiel chapter 1. It's entitled The Vision of the Chariot. But what I'm going to do is give you an introduction to the prophet Ezekiel. So we begin today with the last of the three great prophets. The prophetic ministry of Ezekiel is set in a very turbulent background of the history of the people of Judah. These were the last few years of Judah's independence and the last few years of the existence of the temple built by Solomon. Now, you will remember that we have studied this in the past. The Assyrians who had taken into exile the people of the northern kingdom in the year 723 BC found themselves by the year 628 BC themselves, this very powerful nation of Assyria, they find themselves by the year 628 BC a weakened and a tottering nation after the death of the last strong ruler of Assyria. His name was Ashur-banipal. So Ashur-banipal was the last strong ruler of Assyria. Now, at this time, when Assyria was waning as a superpower, King Josiah began the spiritual reforms in Judah. But as we know, and we've done King Josiah, we know that he lost his life in a battle with the Egyptians. And then his son was taken captive by the Egyptians. We know that the Egyptians even changed his son's name when he placed him on the throne. Now, so the Egyptians replaced Josiah's heir with another son, and this other son was Jehoiakim. Now, Jehoiakim, or as some say Jehoiakim, remember his name is Jehoiakim with an M. Don't confuse it with the next king who's going to be Jehoiakim with an N. But anyway, Jehoiakim becomes king in 609 BC. King Jehoiakim, we know, is unfaithful to Yahweh, unlike his father Josiah. And as a consequence, and we heard of Jehoiakim because he had several arguments and several run-ins, if we may say, with the prophet Jeremiah, who accused him of rejecting the covenant. So during the time of Jeremiah, we see three kings, one of them was Jehoiakim. Now, in the year 605 BC, political events brought the Babylonians to power over the region of Judah. Remember, I said Assyria is now waning and Babylon as a superpower is growing. Judah becomes a vassal state to this new emerging superpower called Babylon. At about this time, Babylon almost lost a battle to the Egyptians in the south. Babylon was in the north. They almost lost a battle to the Egyptians in the south in the year 601 BC. Now, at this point of time, while this battle took place and Babylon almost lost to the Egyptians, King Jehoiakim of Judah thought that now that Babylon was weakened, that this would be a good time for us to challenge. Now will be the great time to challenge Babylon. If we wait, it is going to be too late to assert Judah's independence. And he decided to revolt against Babylon. This was a horrible mistake because everything from now on goes horribly wrong. In the year 598, the Babylonian army, in response to Jehoiakim's revolt, attacks Jerusalem, sacks Jerusalem, and exiled thousands of its cities, thousands of its citizens, its leading citizens. It takes them off to Babylon. Now, Jehoiakim at this point of time dies, and the new king is Jehoiakim, Chin with an N. And Jehoiakim was taken prisoner to Babylon along with men like Daniel from the book of Daniel, and among the others was a very interesting person. He was a newly ordained priest, and his name is Ezekiel, and Ezekiel is the prophet of this book. So very clearly remember that in the first of the, so there were 3 attacks by the Babylonians. Yeah, this is the first attack. In the last attack, Judah and Jerusalem will be destroyed completely. So King Nebuchadnezzar is now the king of Babylon. You will see this name Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel. So King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon now appointed the uncle of Jehoiakim. Remember, Jehoiakim was taken into exile. He appoints his uncle as the king regent, and that uncle's name is King Zedekiah. King Zedekiah would be the last of the kings of Judah before they were completely taken into captivity and exile in the year 586 BC. However, several years into the reign of King Zedekiah, Zedekiah also revolted against Babylon, and you'll remember this when we did the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah tells him, do not fight against Babylon, accept them as your lords, accept the punishment that God is going to give you and take you into exile. But of course, much to the instructions of Jeremiah, Zedekiah didn't bother at all to listen to him. Now, the Babylonians would really, I mean, watching all of this, every time Judah trying to revolt, even though the Babylonians had the king with them, Babylon appointed Zedekiah as king, Babylon kept Daniel and a lot of leading people in their country. They saw that Judah kept on revolting. So it comes to a stage where the Babylonians decided, well, we have done with the shenanigans of Judah. So they laid siege to Jerusalem. This is very important. From the year 589 to 586, okay, they finally end up breaching the walls of Jerusalem. They burn the city, they destroy the temple, and in 586 they take into exile Jerusalem. Before they go into Jerusalem, they kill the young princes. Zedekiah had 2 sons. They must have been really small. They had both the sons killed before the king's very eyes, and then they pluck off the eyes of Zedekiah. So the last thing that King Zedekiah saw before being taken into exile was his very sons being executed in front of him. Now, the text of today tells us that the prophet Ezekiel began his ministry in the year 593, 592 BC, and Ezekiel was one of the Judean exiles taken into captivity. Remember, in the first attack on Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the first attack was 586 BC, and then of course much later you have the final fall of Jerusalem. So the first attack was 586. Now Ezekiel is taken into captivity. He is in Babylon, but he will continue to prophesy through the fall of Jerusalem. So while he is in Babylon, he will hear of Jerusalem in being attacked. He will hear that Jerusalem was destroyed. He will hear the temple has been destroyed, and he will continue to preach and prophesy even after the temple is destroyed up to the year 571 BC. We do not know how old he was when God called him. Some commentators put his age at about 30. It's very interesting to see how God always called young people. Jeremiah was hardly 21 years old. Amos was a young boy of 21 years old. And here is Ezekiel. They come to this conclusion that he was about 30 years of age because he has not yet begun his ministry in the temple. He was young, as I said, he was newly ordained, but he never really got to practice being a priest in the temple because he was taken into exile. So God called him, and he wrote in this period of time. Now, legend also has it, and this is legend. Legend has it that when Ezekiel died, he was buried, and his tomb is now in the town of Hilla, 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 which is in central Iraq. So that's what we know from Ezekiel. We don't know very much about him from the book itself, but we can piece little pieces about his life. Now, coming to the book itself, because we are going to do this book for about a week and a half. The book itself can be divided into clear, distinct parts, two distinct parts. It's 48 chapters. Chapter 1 to 24 contains oracles of judgment against Israel. So the first ones, and now when we speak of Israel, we're going to speak of Israel and Judah together. And chapters 25 to 48 proposes a variety of words of support, words of hope also for Israel. Now, the opening verses, and I've asked you to read chapter 1. It's a little tough to read it, but please read it. A little complex, but the opening verses tell us of the first vision, the vision of the chariot that Ezekiel sees. In short, and just to help you to go through it, four remarkable beings were kind of notable in the text. So these four remarkable beings were notable from a whirlwind of God's presence. Ezekiel later identified these creatures as the cherubim. You'll see this when you go to Ezekiel chapter 10, verse 8 to 5. He calls these creatures the cherubim. Cherubims are angels of unique power and glory that surround God. We have them in Catholic teaching, seraphim and cherubim, the highest of the seven choirs of angels. If ever you want to learn a little bit more about angels, I think I did a teaching on the Feast of the Guardian Angels, on the Feast of Raphael and Saints Raphael and Michael, the guardian angels. So I've done quite a bit of a teaching on that to explain the seven choirs of angels. Now, so basically you have the cherubim who are surrounding God with their glory. Now, this concept of cherubim is also known from the Assyrian religion, as the cherubims in the Assyrian religion were considered minor guardian deities, and these were deities that protected the palaces, protected the temples. The cherubim were usually portrayed in gigantic sculpture with the bodies of bulls and lions, with wings like an eagle and a human head. I was in the Louvre in Paris recently, and you can see the recreation. They have actually recreated, picked up stone by stone, an entire palace of one of the kings of Babylon, and there you see these massive cherubims with lion bodies and wings, or bull bodies and wings, with human faces guarding the palaces and the temples. Now, in the Jerusalem temple, the Lord, if you remember, was also enthroned above in the Holy of Holies. We see this in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1 to 2. Now, coming to this vision that Ezekiel has about these cherubims, Ezekiel noted that they were not men. They were angelic beings. They were not human beings. Yet, he will say that they have the likeness. Yeah, this was their appearance. This was their appearance. They were of human form. Each had four faces. So they had the likeness of a man. They were not men. The likeness of a man was in their general form and in their structure. They looked like men. Now, Christian tradition associates what Ezekiel sees, because he gives a clear description of them in verse 10. So look at verse 10. Christian tradition and the fathers of the church associate what Ezekiel sees with the four evangelists. So you will notice, let me just read that part for you, though it's not part of our text. As the appearance of their faces, the four had the face of a human being, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle. So Christian tradition associates what Ezekiel saw with the four evangelists. As I said, the lion today is associated with Mark, or the ox is associated with St. Luke, the eagle with St. John, and the man is associated with Matthew. Now the fact that we are told that these four cherubs with human faces always went forward without taking anything back. It stood for, according to the fathers of the church, it stood for the fact that the Gospels cannot make a mistake, the inerrancy of the Gospels. So they went wherever the Spirit went. As the Father said, this is how inspiration was formed. Now, let's come to the vision and its consequences. We are told that Ezekiel, after seeing these four cherubs, which is described in great detail, their hands, their wings, their feet, their face, Ezekiel saw beyond this. He saw wheels that were there besides the creatures, one wheel for each of the creatures. Now the wheels, we are told, gleamed, shone like chrysolite. There were wheels within the wheels. Now it is unclear what all this means. We have no, there is no clarity. So it's unclear what is meant by all of this. Whenever we are told here, whenever the creatures went, the wheels went and could rise from the earth. So that was the power of this chariot. So it could rise from the earth. Why? Because, as Ezekiel tells us, the Spirit was within these wheels. Now, little complex to understand all of this, but it gets even more complex. We are told over the heads of the creatures was a firmament. This firmament was like crystal. When they went, the sound was like that of the waters. Above the firmament, we were told there was a throne that was like sapphire, and he who sat on the throne seemed to have a human form. But we are told that from his loins and up there was an appearance of gleaming bronze. The lower part of the loins was like fire, and there was brightness like the rainbow above him. So you can read all of that from verse 22 onwards. Naturally, Ezekiel has seen this great vision, and this is what we are being told in chapter 1 of this great vision of the chariot that Ezekiel has. What's the response? What would be the response of Ezekiel? It is seen in the last verse. When I saw it, I fell on my face, and then he hears a voice speaking to him. And with that, chapter 1 ends. What I've tried to do today is to give you a background so that you understand that Ezekiel is a prophet who is preaching just before Jerusalem falls, but he's preaching not in Jerusalem, he's prophesying in Babylon. He's been taken into captivity in the first round of captives, along with the king, along with Daniel of the book of Daniel, and from there he watches his beloved city Jerusalem completely collapse. So today we have done chapter 1. Tomorrow we are going to listen to a very interesting, and this is a little more easy, I can assure you, a little more interesting vision that Ezekiel has. It's called the vision of the scroll, but that's got plenty of pastoral applications. So don't be too discouraged. I know some of you feel, my gosh, there's so much to learn. Very often you need to listen to these teachings at least twice. Yeah, scripture study doesn't come easy. As I said to you, it takes me roughly about 2.5 hours to do just this. Just to study and to put my thoughts down and to write, it takes a lot of time. Also, it's a lot of history, and history is not very entertaining. But you need an introduction to the book. I gave you an introduction to Jeremiah, an introduction to Isaiah. I gave you an introduction last week also to the book of Nahum. So these introductions, whenever you need to study a book, go back to the introduction, listen, and listen to this video a couple of times. The other thing that you can do is start making a chart, yeah, of the dates. And so especially those of you who are catechists and teaching children, I know in Bombay many catechists have written and said to me, Father, finally we are beginning to understand what we were teaching all these years. Yeah, we were teaching, but we had no clue really what we were teaching except what was given in the text. Now we have a greater understanding. So thank you everybody for joining me this morning. God bless you. I'm still enjoying these lovely flowers that my friends Eldridge and Valini had sent me on Vianney Sunday. Thank you everybody. God bless you. Keep well.